Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And we are past the midway point in this 2032 season. We've got two big things that we are going to do in this episode. Number two on the list, and I'm sure some of you right now are thinking this is going to be number one on the list. But number two on the list is to complete the 2032 draft. We talked about some of the most interesting prospects who are on the board for us with our 22nd selection in the draft at the end of the last episode. And appreciate all of the thoughts and feedback from our loyal viewers, also known as our worldwide scouting department, on what we should do in that draft. But even though the draft is how we finished up the last episode, we've got a more important priority before we get to the draft. Our A's have been playing some of their best baseball over this month of July to get our record back to 500 after a pretty bad May and June. And as we sit here with 72 games to go, we are actually in the final wild card spot in the American League, 2.5 games up on both the Rangers and the Twins for that final wild card spot. So despite the up and down season that we've had, despite the fact that we're only 500, we would be a playoff team for the third time in the past 4 seasons if the season were to end today. And the goal, as we've talked about over our last several episodes, is to try to have this Oakland A's team as competitive as possible this year. There are several key members of this team that are either in their final years of their contract with us, heading into very expensive arbitration seasons, or heading into team options that we may choose to move on from this upcoming offseason. And this roster that's been to 2 American League Championship Series in the last 3 seasons is going to look very different next year, which is why we're kind of viewing it as a win-now season and a last chance for this group to try to compete for a second World Championship. And we did make a pretty significant trade about a week and a half ago in game time when we brought on board from those Texas Rangers who are chasing us Ty Madden, a fine 32-year-old pitcher who is in the final year of his contract. He's pitched 1 game for us, did very well in that one performance. And we're hoping for several more outings similar to that over the next 2.5 months of this season and hopefully through a long postseason run. But with Madden recently joining us, our lack of offense is a more significant issue. And offline, I've been spending a lot of time figuring out a way to potentially make a trade to help our offense in this win-now season. And if you've been looking closely, you can see that there are 3 really big names who are on the trade block at this point. And we are going to put together a blockbuster to bring one of these players on board before we even get to the draft. We have set ourselves up in a position where for the A's, we've got over $11 million to bring on contracts. With what some of these guys are making, we're still going to need the team that we trade with to retain a chunk of these contracts, most likely. But even though we struck out in a way in the free agent market in the past offseason, the fact that we saved our pennies is going to give us an opportunity to add an impact player right now. And those 3 impact players that we're looking at are Juan Soto. Kind of odd that for a 33, soon to be 34-year-old veteran who's been in the majors for 14 years, we only have average scouting accuracy on him for some reason, but he, despite his advancing age, remains one of the top offensive players in baseball. Even in what is a down year for him, he's still putting up a 138 WRC plus. Does not bring much to the table defensively, but that left-handed bat with above average contact, well above average home run power, and still having that exceptional world-class eye, one of the best in baseball history, would be a great asset to our team. He's making $44 million in this final year of his deal with the Twins. So he would be a pure rental for us, and not going to necessarily be an easy trade for us to execute. You can see we've got nobody who makes this work now, but that's really because of the money. If we have the Twins and we start off a conversation with them keeping half of his contract, you can see that at least they are willing to talk to us. Now we have to give up one of the top players on our major league team, or one of the truly premier prospects in our system, to get a deal done. But it doesn't seem like it would be impossible for us to bring Mr. Soto on board. Another potential option for us is Cole Young, who is now with the Cincinnati organization, making $36 million also in the final year of his contract. He does not have the same kind of home run power as Juan Soto, but another guy with an excellent eye, above average contact, above average power, or above average gap power, and pretty good speed. Has a 116 WRC plus this year, also a pretty solid defensive infielder. And over the course of Cole Young's career, he's put up a 122 WRC plus. Certainly younger than Soto. He'll be turning 29 in a few weeks. Fragile as far as his injury proneness, but although his bat is not Soto-esque, when we look at his speed and we look at his defensive ability, he is certainly a potentially very interesting player for us to add. Another guy that we're going to need them to keep a decent chunk of his contract for anything realistically to happen. And with that 50% retention for Cole Young, you can see the price for him is actually higher than it's going to be for Soto, because there's nobody in our organization that will make the numbers work there as far as the Reds are considered. So it's likely going to take a much more significant package to get Mr. Young on board. As I noted, he's better defensively, better speed, and a very accomplished bat, but not the same type of bat as Juan Soto. If we look at our top prospects with Cole Young, if we put in Arturo Uresti, we at least get into a situation where then we're in similar area as we are with Soto, where it's going to take a big-time major league player or a big-time prospect in addition to Uresti to get the deal done. We can make the money work at a slightly lower level with Young, but even with them retaining 35% of his contract, doesn't really change the opportunity set to bring him on board. And last, but certainly not least, is Michael Harris II, one of the top all-around players in baseball. He is wrecked physically, but he is a excellent defensive outfielder and a player with an excellent bat, making only $20 million in the final year of his contract with Atlanta, that excellent contract that the Braves signed him to. He is a guy who has been an MVP. In addition to his Rookie of the Year, he's won a Gold Glove and been a perennial All-Star with also some Silver Sluggers and a playoff MVP award. taken a look at Mr. Harris over the course of his major league career, and he's put up a 137 WRC plus, also very excellent. Has a career WAR of over 50 despite being just 31 years old. The issue with Mr. Harris when we try to trade for him, however, is that he's not willing to waive his no-trade clause at this point. So that puts us in a situation where I feel like we want to add a big-time offensive player as soon as possible to get the biggest impact out of them as possible. And there's no guarantees that Harris will waive his no-trade clause over the next 3 weeks. And there's certainly no guarantee that even if he does waive the no-trade clause, he'd be willing to waive it to come to Oakland. So from that perspective, Juan Soto or Cole Young are going to be the direction that we go. And given that we need offense, and it's only a rental, and most importantly, the price is actually lower for Soto than it is for Young, we are going to be bringing Mr. Soto to Oakland. And I say we are going to be bringing Mr. Soto to Oakland to help us over these next 2.5 months and hopefully long into the postseason, because I've spent a lot of time offline trying to put a deal together that doesn't cost us one of our top 2 prospects in Saldana and Uresti, and also doesn't cost us a player that's important to our aspirations to make the playoffs and win this year. And the price that I'm going to be willing to pay is the primary asset that we're going to get rid of to get this deal done is one that some of you who have followed us over the years probably will not like to see me getting rid of him. But we are going to include Arturo Estrada in this deal. He is an international free agent signing from about 4.5 years ago. Listed as the number 97 prospect in baseball. He's the 4th highest rated prospect in our organization. Incredible personality, incredible speed. We think he's going to be a very good defensive outfielder with that well above average range. We think that his contact and his gap power could both be excellent, but his power we always knew was going to probably not be great. And his eye at this point is not looking like it's going to be particularly great either. We did promote him to high A ball this year, and he hasn't been good at that level, hitting just a .197 with a 59 WRC plus. He's going to be 21 years old soon. I don't love moving on from Estrada, because even though he does have the likelihood that he's not going to hit for a ton of power and he's not going to draw a ton of walks, I still think the contact, gap power, and speed combination is potentially very interesting. And with that great personality and really nice outfield range, think he still likely has a pretty good major league career ahead of him. But when we include Estrada in the deal, you can see that all of a sudden we've got a lot of options to include with him and get this deal done to rent Juan Soto. Basically, I'm going to add a few extra players into the deal to get the Twins to retain a bigger chunk of his contract. We can afford him with them retaining just 50%, but then that leaves us with only $1.4 million left. Given that this is ultimately a win-now year, and that Estrada is going to be, in my mind, by far the most valuable asset that we're going to have to give up to bring him on board, I'm willing to include some additional players to get them to retain somewhat more of his money. So I'll show you what the final deal is going to look like here. And our Oakland A's are going to bring on a legendary hitter, even if it's only for a few months, into our organization. Despite having, at this point, still the lowest budget in baseball, and for now, the lowest payroll in baseball. Juan Soto is going to be a member of the A's. And I think, as I said, I don't think Estrada is going to necessarily be a superstar, but I think he can be a guy who can have a very nice 12, 14, 15-year major league career. It's not inconceivable he could win a batting title, lead the league in stolen bases on many occasions, probably go to multiple all-star games. So it's a lot to give up, in addition with some other assets for a few months of Soto. But if a team with the lowest budget in baseball is close, and we're kind of feeling like this is our last season for this band to be together, I'm going to be willing to spend the assets to try to improve our odds to win a second World Series as much as I possibly can. We're not going to be the favorites just by bringing on Soto. As we've talked about, we're a 500 team right now. But the additions of Soto and Madden to a team that has underperformed expectations in my head and underperformed expectations as far as the Pythagorean calculations based on how we performed this year, I'm willing to roll the dice and invest in that kind of team. And when we add in 3 more players, we can get the Twins to retain 85% of his contract. So our available money is still going to dip by about $3 million, but that'll still leave us with $8 million-ish to play with as we get closer to the trade deadline, and potentially even use as we try to sign drafted players. It seems like we're in a financial position where ownership right now is willing to let us do that, and it also just gives us the opportunity to have a little extra money saved to hopefully make some money this year overall for Mr. Fisher and keep our budget where it is, if not higher. Xavier Edwards, a veteran who we signed to a minor league deal this year, is the least interesting of the guys that we had to add in. Another guy with a good personality, kind of a 4A guy who, over the course of his career in the major leagues, has been a slightly below average offensive player, but still an above replacement level player, but really has not had a big-time major league season since 2027, when he was with the Cubs organization and the Marlins organization and put up a 2.3 WAR, which was the second best of his career after the 2.5 WAR. Which was the best in his career. He was a 2.5 WAR with Miami that year and below replacement level after they traded him to the Cubs. The more interesting players that we're going to include, center fielder Juan Guerrero, 27-year-old, a guy that we signed as a minor league free agent last offseason. A useful piece for the organization, but certainly not someone we're not going to include to bring on Juan Soto. And then the one that I don't love, but if he helps them keep an extra 10% of his contract, which he does, is worth it for me. Actually, I think Lackey might have even been 15% of Soto's contract. Catcher Yiddy Lackey, not a big-time prospect, but he is a 25-year-old who is an excellent, outstanding defensive catcher who's been a very productive player for us at both the rookie level and more recently the A-ball level ever since we picked him up in a trade with Washington almost 3 years ago. Just one of those type of guys with his really good defense that I love to have in our minor league system to help develop those young arms, and with his great defense and the fact that although he's not really a major league prospect, he's been a pretty dominant hitter at times in the lower levels of ball, is also a guy who not just helps with the development of some of the young pitchers, but helps ensure that those teams in the lower levels of the organization are successful on the field to help the development of those players and them not going negative. So I don't love giving him up, but again, we're bringing Juan Soto on board. If I need to give up one of the top prospects in our organization and then other guys who are unlikely to ever play for us in the majors to get that deal done, it's something that I am certainly willing to do. And Juan Soto, welcome to Oakland. And that also is a trade that, not surprisingly, should help us in terms of fan interest. It's going to be a temporary boost for us this year, since it's almost certain that we won't be bringing Soto back next year. But it still should help put some more people in the seats over the near term of this season. And taking a look at our financial situation, we did get a 3-point boost in fan interest up to 54 by bringing on Soto. So as we talked about, hopefully that will help with higher attendance, more revenue per game, and ultimately help our financial situation. So Soto is going to be on board for us in the not-so-distant future. We talked about at the end of the last episode that our center fielder, Luis Lara, is going to be on the IL for about a month. We did bring Hideki Etakawa back up from AAA, where he had hit .311 with a 114 WRC plus for us, but he's been a below-average offensive player and a well-below-average offensive player in most of the chances that we've given him at the major league level. But we like his glove, we like his defensive versatility, and he'll give us a little bit better defense in the late innings of some games by hopefully having Arakawa on board, and also a more accomplished defensive shortstop for the games that Brian Rincon is not able to start. My hunch is that with the acquisition of Soto, John Rhodes, who's actually done a pretty nice job for us since we brought him up, playing only or primarily against left-handed pitching with a .362 average and a 186 WRC plus, will probably be waived and DFA'd to make room for Mr. Soto, because Soto will be clearly taking someone's job against left-handed pitching. And against right-handed pitching, it's going to be a little bit more interesting decision. Jared Kelenic, who we brought up just a few days ago, not doing well, 1 for 11, but an extremely small sample size. Do like that captain personality. And Chase DeLauder, who is now our DH with the better defensive Kelenic on the roster. DeLauder with an 85 WRC plus, not really delivering the type of offense that we'd like to see out of him. Those are two guys who we could also look to move on from. Certainly one of them will be losing their spot in the starting lineup against right-handed pitching. I guess in theory, if we wanted to go a little more left-handed heavy, Kevin Stubblefield, who doesn't bring a ton to the table defensively, or offensively, or defensively for that matter. Offensively, we were hoping he'd be more productive this year than he has been, but he is a guy who only has 15 games of AAA experience that we signed to a long-term contract and brought up to the major leagues this year. Maybe sending Stubblefield down to AAA for a little bit of extra seasoning is another option if we don't want to move on from Rhodes and we decide that we want to keep a very lefty heavy lineup against right-handed pitching. So some options that we're going to be thinking about offline after this episode before we move forward post-draft. But the big news of this episode, regardless of what we do in the draft, is that Juan Soto is an Oakland A for the rest of the 2032 season. And with Mr. Soto officially locked up for the remainder of this season, we'll turn our attention to the draft, which I'm sure is what many of our loyal viewers thought we'd be focused on from the start of this episode. And as I noted, we're going to be picking 22nd overall. We simmed at the end of the last episode up to our pick. So we had a good thought or a good opportunity set of who some of the more interesting players were. We'll talk about what I'm thinking, and while talking about what I'm thinking, what some of our loyal viewers are thinking as well. The most popular college player was Josh Ament with viewers, and a number of viewers opined on multiple players that they liked, so you'll hear some names more frequently, but Ament was liked by Jarek Braxton, fake name, John Lambert, and DLL First Base 14 to various extents. Coming out of VCU as a college junior, his contact and his gap power aren't far off major league quality. Has a little more work to do with his power and his eye. Not a lot of speed, interesting defensively with a great arm and a nice personality. A couple of guys that are also college players that I'm interested in that I didn't look at, I don't think as deeply in the last episode, were center fielder Ben Carpenter out of Auburn. Pretty similar profile, better range, also a really good personality, more speed, he's durable, but the gap power is not along quite as far, and he similarly has some work to do with his power and eye, but could be a pretty interesting outfielder as well. And Greg Kovalik, a second baseman out of Michigan, decent speed, not that great defensively, but potentially extremely interesting home run power with a decent eye and decent gap power. Making contact is going to be Kovalik's issue. I like all three of those guys. I think if I had to pick one of them, it would be Ament or Carpenter. But I tend to think at this point I am going to go with one of the high school players with perhaps higher ceiling, at least with our pick here at number 22 overall. Ament is almost certainly not going to be around, and I don't know that Carpenter or Kovalik will be around in the second round. But with our first round pick, given that I don't like these guys the same way I liked Jake Ortega a few seasons ago, and Ortega was obviously someone we drafted out of college much higher than the 22nd overall pick, I think I am, as I noted, going to go with a lower floor but higher potential ceiling high school player to bolster our organization here in this 2032 draft, at least in the first round. So turning to some high school position players that I might be more inclined to pick here in the draft. I can't say that a college player, one of the guys we just talked about, is impossible, but right now I'm not leaning in that direction. But as I talk through things, sometimes my decisions change. But there were three position players that I kind of put towards the top of my list, and it was gratifying to see that they were the same three position players that some of you shared comments on with me from our worldwide scouting team. Bobby Vermillion was one of my final three high school players who made the list. Wyme943 also liked Vermillion among the position players. Incredibly versatile defensively, although not necessarily exceptional at any position. Decent speed. The attraction of Vermillion is clearly the fact that his home run power and his eye are both excellent potentially if he fully develops. Good gap power as well. The concern is the ability to actually hit the ball and avoid strikeouts is very uncertain, and it doesn't seem like there's any particularly special personality traits at this point that will help improve his chance of success. But just with that power and eye combination and the defensive versatility, if we're going to roll the dice on a high schooler, Vermillion is someone I would consider at least. The two more popular high school players among the three that I had mentioned with the fans of this, I guess I can't really call you fans. I wish I could call you fans. My loyal viewers, my worldwide scouting department, my virtual friends, but I don't know if you're actually fans, so I apologize for perhaps being a bit level jumping in terms of our relationship and what you think of this channel. But Joe Harmon was a popular choice with Hold Door, Fake Name, John Lambert, Peter Hooper, and DLL First Base 14. Definitely intrigued by the mayor. A very well-balanced bat, potentially, that could be above average at everything. Borderline excellent contact. Really good speed. Solid outfield range. And some positive personality traits with that high adaptability and work ethic as far as his potential development. Looking for right around slot, but I think that he could be a very interesting high school player for us to bring on board. And then the third position player that was high on my list that was also popular with the worldwide scouting department is the shortstop Fidel Salazar. And Not My Four Ply, Hold Door, Fake Name, and DLL First Base 14 all had him on their list as well. Really like the defense. He's a guy who looks like he could be a solid to very good shortstop, second baseman, or third baseman defensively. The contact could be borderline excellent with above average gap power and home run power if he fully develops, and an eye that's close to average. Decent speed, although he's not a particularly proficient base runner, and don't like the low intelligence. But Salazar, to me, is another interesting player to consider among position players. But as you know, in baseball, it is not just position players. And there are pitchers out there as well, some of whom we've been talking about for several years. A couple of pitchers that were borderline candidates for me. Josh Bess, 17-year-old starter, good personality, and I think probably has one of the higher floors of the high school pitchers. I think he could be a respectable starter. I don't think he's ever going to be great because he's most likely a three-pitch guy without any exceptional pitches. But decent stamina, extreme ground ball tendencies, and nice personality. But not seriously thinking about him. The other guy who just kind of missed my list was Alejandro Medina. Like the durability, another guy who looks like he could have a pretty interesting profile. Has the opportunity to have a 6-pitch arsenal, but we don't think any of those pitches are going to be particularly special. Good enough stamina, but similar to most high school pitchers, he's got a lot of work ahead of him to get to the level where he's going to be a contributor. I think if either a Bess or a Medina lingers around for a round or two and is available in the second or third round, they'd be somebody to consider, but certainly no guarantees that that's going to happen. Jonathan Brown is a guy that I'm actually considering as a pitcher. The issue with him is that he's impossible to sign, but we think his stuff could be absolutely devastating. He's a 17-year-old who's already thrown in the mid to high 90s, potentially a 4-pitch arsenal. It's also potentially a 1-pitch arsenal of major league quality pitches if the curve change and sinker don't work out along with the fastball. But think that his stuff could be exceptional and his movement and control both above average. The money that he's looking for likely makes it unrealistic that we'd be able to bring him on board. But he's a guy who, if he happens to linger and he's available in the 4th or 5th round, maybe we take a flyer on him and hope that the impossible to sign price is less impossible than we had hoped. Another guy that didn't make my final list but intrigued me a bit was Matt Perry, and Matt Perry is a guy that Zargex76 liked. 17-year-old out of Worcester, like the high work ethic, like the low greed, potentially a 3 to 5 pitch arsenal, probably a 4-pitch most likely when all works out. Really good stuff, average movement, potentially good control. He's a pretty interesting prospect, and I can certainly consider him if I was going to go with a high schooler, given that Brown and the impossible to signingness of Brown probably means he's not a guy I'm going to go for in the first round. If I was going to go with a high school pitcher in the first round, it would probably be Matt Perry over the other options. But the guy that I haven't talked about yet, but we've talked about plenty over the past 3 years in game time of this playthrough, is Amari Raphael, a guy that we looked at in the draft 3 years ago. He ended up going 26th overall to the Rockies, who failed to sign him. And he's a guy that was pretty popular with the viewers as well. Zargex76, who preferred Perry, as we talked about, said he could certainly understand going with Raphael. And Peter Hooper, DLL First Base 14, Not My 4-Ply, Wyme 943, John Lambert, all kind of had Raphael on their short list or their sole list of players to consider. 21-year-old, soon to be 22-year-old college player, throws in the mid to high 90s, a potential 5-pitch arsenal. He's got 4 that aren't far off major league quality at this point, still needs to do some work on that change. So we think his stuff is close to major league quality right now. His movement is not too far off. The big concerns are giving up the long ball and getting some better control. Was odd that a guy who was picked 26th overall 3 years ago coming out of high school went to D3 Piedmont College to face a poor competition level. I'm generally a bit reticent to draft guys who have faced that poor level of competition, but there is a part of me that thinks that although Raphael really has not progressed too much since we looked at him before that 2029 draft, you can see his stuff has improved by 10 points, although his ceiling for his stuff has declined by 10 points. But his movement has actually gotten worse, oddly, although we think his movement potential is higher, and his control has improved by a bit. But not significantly, and his velocity's gone up 1 mile an hour. I can kind of convince myself that at 21 years old, with high adaptability and the big investment we're making in player development in our organization and the excellent coaching that we have in the minors, that we can probably accelerate Raphael's development over the next couple seasons compared to what has happened during his 3 years at Piedmont. I think we can certainly get the stuff to a 55, and maybe with some work on some off pitches in the development lab, get it up to a 60. Movement probably is going to settle in at about average. The big concern is what we can do with his control. It's only improved by 5 points over the last 3 years. But even if we can only get it up to a 45, which is only half the way to where we think his full potential is, with above average stuff and average movement, and the chance that either the stuff or the movement could be maybe a notch or two higher than what we just outlined, I think he could still be a pretty interesting pitcher for us. So Raphael is certainly on the short list as well. An interesting thing this year, which is not that positive compared to most of the previous seasons in the draft, is that we've spent a fair amount of time in recent drafts looking at the mock drafts and trying to put a plan together where, oh, it looks like this guy's only going in the 3rd round, even though we really like him. Let's skip him in the 1st and pick him in the 2nd. And, oh, this guy's not going to the 5th round, even though we like him in the 2nd, we can pick him in the 4th. And we've had some really good luck with that over the past few drafts. The issue this season, as we get ready to make our 1st round selection, is that, at least according to the mock draft, most of the guys that we've talked about are unlikely to be available when our 2nd round pick comes up. So I think it's pretty unlikely that we're going to have 3 or 4 of the guys that we've just talked about still sitting on the board 40 picks from now or whenever we're on the clock next, given the supplemental 1st round picks. So we kind of have to get it right. The one thing I will note is that it looked like Fidel Salazar was being drafted a bit later, at least in the mock drafts, than some of the other players. So I think he's probably the most realistic prospect to think might fall to the 2nd round. And I do think that some of the lower tier pitchers, there's a chance some of them might fall as well. But I don't think this is going to be a situation where if we were to go with Raphael right now, that when we get to the 2nd round, we're going to have a choice out of Harmon, Salazar, and Vermillion, and Ament. You know, I'm not expecting 2 or 3 of those guys to be around. As we've talked about, it seems pretty likely that Salazar would be the only one around if we make that type of decision. That being said, we're going to roll the dice on the college pitcher, Raphael. He's a guy we thought about coming out of high school, although he hasn't progressed incredibly over the last few years. His ceiling is still an excellent major league pitcher. And even if he doesn't reach his full potential anywhere, I think he can still be a good, solid major league pitcher. And as I've talked about, I think with the player development and coaching investment that we've made in our minors, and the fact that he's still only 21 years old, we can get more out of him in terms of his development over the next few years. He's also supposedly easy to sign for us at slot. Some of you have noted that might be an opportunity for us to save a little bit more money, which could come in handy with an impossible-to-sign guy down the line. Scouting director is recommending Omari Okereke, guy that we talked about briefly in the last episode. He didn't make my short list, didn't make the short list of any of the viewers who opined either. Nicely balanced bat in Okereke. Not much speed. Pretty average defensively for an outfielder. He's not all that exciting to me. If we were to have the scouting director recommend a pitcher, he does recommend Omari Raphael. And that is going to be our selection here in the 1st round of the 2032 first-year player draft. We've been hunting Omari Raphael for 3 years, and he is now a member of the Oakland A's organization. And as we thought might be the case, in the second round, pitching wise, we still have Alejandro Medina, Jonathan Brown, and Matt Perry, as well as Josh Bess. So the other four pitchers that we talked about are all still available for us to consider here in the second round, which is good. I did not expect many batters to be available. Interestingly, one of the 5-star prospects, Chris Derrick, right fielder, is still available. Not great speed, pretty average defensively, but a potentially pretty interesting bat if he fully develops. He's still around. Joe Harmon, surprisingly, is. Fidel Salazar, less surprisingly, is. But the other guys that we had been thinking about, as far as the 3 college players that we talked about, as well as the center fielder Vermillion, are all off the list. But quite honestly, with both Harmon, Salazar, and Derrick left, as well as the pitchers that we just talked about, the opportunity set here in the second round is better than I would have expected, because you can see there were 33 first-round picks, 9 supplemental picks, so that's 42 plus 22. So pick number 66 overall, I'm actually pleasantly surprised with the opportunity set that we still have available. And the positive thing, and I talked about this earlier when we were talking about Soto, given that we got the Twins to retain a good chunk of his contract, is that we do have the opportunity to potentially put some of that money that we haven't used on free agents into a player who's a little more expensive over slot. As I talked about, if anyone's going to drop among position players, I think it's going to be Salazar. So with the fact that Derrick and Harmon are both here, if we go with a position player, I think it'll be one of them, just with the thought that Salazar might still be there in the third round. I really like Perry, Bess, Brown, and Medina, but I don't think it's impossible that one of them might fall to the third round. So to me, it comes down to Derrick or Harmon. In Derrick, with the potential for 70 contact, 60 power, and 60 eye, not looking for huge money, is a very interesting bat to potentially bring on board. But the speed and the defense are not horrible, but certainly not exceptional. Harmon, not quite as good with the contact, similar power potential, not quite as good with the eye, a bit more gap power, but better speed, better defensively, and some better personality traits. Even though he's looking for more money, I think the fact that Mayor Harmon is here in the second round is the direction I'm going to go. I'm assuming the scouting director is going to say Derrick, given his ceiling. Not a shock to see that. Among the pitchers, recommends Juan Campos, a starting prospect, who is another guy that I didn't necessarily love as a first rounder, but even though it looks like he's only a 3-pitch guy, if he's still around in a round, I'd certainly consider him strongly. But we're going to go with Harmon here in the second round and roll the dice that despite my thoughts that there might not be a lot of guys we like left in the second, third, fourth rounds, that maybe the draft will break differently than I had expected. Unfortunately, we may have pushed the envelope a bit too far with the position players. Both Derrick and Salazar now gone. So likely going to be hoping that one of those pitchers that we've talked about is still on the board. And Campos, who our scout recently recommended, is Perry, who we liked as far as high school pitchers, still is. The other guys that we've talked about are largely gone at this point, but we still have some. I guess Brown, the impossible to sign, is still there, but Bess and Medina both gone at this point, but we still do have some interesting options among the pitchers. And I'm not going to go with an impossible to sign player yet when there's a couple of 4.5-star potential high school pitchers available. I'm assuming our scouting director is going to recommend Campos since he recommended him last time. He is under slot, which is nice, although supposedly he's extremely hard for us to sign. Campos, we think the stuff could be excellent. The movement and control both closer to average. Like the high work ethic. Respectable stamina, respectable at holding runners. And he's close to a major league fastball at this point. He's only going to be a 3-pitch guy. He does have those extreme fly ball tendencies that can be problematic, and it looks like keeping the ball in the park may be a concern for him. But certainly a very interesting prospect for the 3rd round. But I can say the same thing about Matt Perry. I don't think his stuff is quite as high end, but I think the low end of his stuff is probably higher, given that he's got a potential 3, 4, most likely 4, but possibly a 5-pitch arsenal as opposed to the 3-pitch arsenal that Campos has. A little less stamina, a little better at holding on runners. Doesn't throw quite as hard. Neutral tendencies, like the high work ethic. Similar-ish movement, potentially better control. I like both of these guys, but in the 3rd round, the guy that Zargex76 liked a lot, to me, is pretty good value. And we're going to go with our friend, Matt Perry, here in round number 3. And 4th round, Campos is still available. And after our scout recommended him outright in the 3rd, and as the pitcher he would take in the 2nd, given my love of pitchers and the fact that I'm willing to pick high school pitchers and feel that with the coaching we have, the player development that we have, that although the success rate with high school pitchers is not nearly what it's going to be with college pitchers, if we bring enough high ceiling high school pitchers into our organization, ultimately we're going to hit on enough of them to keep our major league system stacked. And is a 4th round pick, despite the fact that he may be only a 3-pitch guy. He does have some favorable personality traits. Not looking for a ton of money. I think Campos is a excellent pick for us here in the 4th round. So we're going to go with a 3rd pitcher in 4 rounds with Mr. Juan Campos here in the 4th. Moving on to the 5th round. And the impossible to sign Mr. Brown is now gone. There were a couple of batters I liked that I didn't pick in the 4th round because I liked Campos better. And unfortunately, the guys that I like the most are gone. Jorge Cobos is probably the guy I like the most out of the people that are still around. But I'm going to spend a little more time offline investigating the full depth and breadth of the opportunity set before making that decision. And as I now get ready to make our 5th round pick, can't say that I'm really in love with anybody, but there's actually a fair amount of players that I kind of like. So I'm hoping that we'll get to make some interesting selections in the 6th and 7th round as well of guys that I'm thinking about right now. Given the upside of Cobos, at least according to our scout, I think he's who we're going to go with. That 70 contact is pretty interesting, given the fact that we think he can be kind of average-ish, maybe a little bit better in terms of his power everywhere else. Don't love the lack of speed, and the defense is certainly nothing special. but I think he's the most interesting guy available right now. Scouting director actually recommends the other 4-star potential guy, Brooks Wimster, facing poor competition out of Canada. Not great defensively, not great speed. So he has that in common with Kobos. Low intelligence. Power is potentially his specialty, but given that Kobos has faced a somewhat higher level of competition, is younger, and has potentially slightly above average power, along with that potentially really good contact, we're going to go with Kobos here in the 5th round. If I do anything interesting over the next few rounds in terms of players that I'm hoping will fall, I will let you know. And there's actually a couple of relievers that I was hoping might drop to the 6th round available. Edgar Farinas is the highest rated. Potentially brilliant stuff, but he also is potentially only a one-pitch guy. Don't love the potential below average movement and the potential that he'll give up a lot of home runs, but 17-year-old thrown in the mid to high 90s is certainly interesting. Chuck Huntley, another 17-year-old, is the other one that I really like. He's a lefty who actually throws a little harder, 96 to 98. High work ethic, not a ton of stamina, but he's really good at holding on runners. And he's got a potential 4-pitch arsenal. Outside of the sinker, we don't think any of them are going to be truly exceptional pitches, but a pretty interesting potential arsenal with the potential for average movement and plus control. I like both of these guys. I'm going to go with Huntley here in the 6th. If it turned out that Farinas is still available in the 7th, he would be on my short list, although I'm going to... and he is still available here in the 7th, but I am going to check on one position player that I was hoping might fall as well. And the position player that I was most hoping might fall is now gone, so we're actually going to go with Farinas here. A little worried about giving up the home runs, but he is a very toolsy young pitcher. Hopefully that changeup will develop, and maybe we'll get some future major league relievers here in the 6th and 7th rounds of this draft. And after the guys that we got in the middle rounds, nothing particularly interesting. You can see everyone should be pretty straightforward to sign, even in those first 5 rounds. One exception, 19th round, we went with Jonathan Jackson. Impossible to sign. He's not really even a brilliant prospect, but as a left-handed reliever, we thought he was worth taking a flyer on to just see how impossible his demands really are. And he says he needs a bonus above $11 million, so we will likely not be making an offer to Mr. Jackson, but hopefully we'll be able to get the pitchers Rafael, Perry, and Campos signed, as well as the center fielder Harmon and the third baseman Kobos locked up and into our organization in relatively short order. So thanks again to all of you who shared your thoughts on what we should do in the draft. Hopefully it ends up being relatively successful for us. Won't know for sure until about 2040, 2045, but hopefully some of the guys that we picked will be having an impact in the majors over the course of this playthrough, hopefully with us in Oakland. A few housekeeping items before we finish. One thing that I didn't mention, it wasn't a huge factor in us bringing on Juan Soto. Juan Soto just being Juan Soto was the main reason we decided to trade away one of the top prospects in our organization for him. But I did appreciate that Soto was on the Twins, who at 2.5 games behind us are one of the 2 teams that were closest to us in the race for that final wild card spot, and figured by making ourselves better by bringing Soto on board, we also make one of the teams that is a prime competitor for us for a wild card spot weaker. And as we've talked about, we also brought Madden on board from Texas not that long ago. So at this point, with where we are in the standings, we're up on both Texas and Minnesota, and we've taken away one of the better pitchers from Texas and one of the best offensive players in the league from Minnesota. So hopefully that will help us at least maintain this third wild card spot, and who knows, maybe improve on that over the course of the next 2.5 months. Also, as we sit here about 90 games into the season, wanted to check in on a few players that we've followed over the years that I know some of you are interested in. The knuckleballer Andres Rojas, coming off of a Cy Young Award-winning season with the Marlins, is actually having a bit of a down year. A 6-9 record with a 4.15 ERA. Still has put up a 2.1 WAR for the Marlins this year as a 25-year-old, but after leading the league in pitcher WAR in the NL each of the last 2 years, certainly a down season for the excellent young knuckleballer. We talked about a while back the fractured season that a fractured ankle was going to result in for Hidero Endo. He was hitting .213 this year with a 123 WRC plus in the very early going when he fractured that ankle in mid-April. Still going to likely be out till mid to late August with that fractured ankle, but he should get a month plus at the end of the year. Not going to be a great season for Endo, and he's due to be making over $9 million next year via arbitration. So still think the trade that brought us Colt Keith for Endo and others was ultimately the right thing for us to do. Not getting Shoji the Professor Bame signed was something that I know we've been first guest and second guest on from this past offseason. Ultimately felt like 5 years at almost $25 million a year for a guy coming over from Japan with some negative personality traits was just a little bit too risky for us to try to do in Oakland. And after making Bame a couple of offers, we ultimately didn't make him an offer at the end. Felt like he probably wanted to play somewhere else, but he is admittedly having an excellent rookie MLB season for the Dodgers, hitting .293, 27 homers, 76 ribbies, and a 153 WRC plus with a 3.7 WAR. Certainly that bat in the middle of our lineup would be very useful, but hopefully we'll be getting similar-ish, if not better production from Juan Soto going forward, at least for the remainder of this season. And the last player I wanted to check in on was Royce Lewis, who was kind of our fallback option from Bame. Lewis did a really nice job with us last year as a rental, as we talked about extensively in the offseason. Another guy that we did make an offer to came back looking for more money, ultimately signed for 4 years at about $22.5 million a year with the Dodgers into his mid-30s. Felt like that money was a little rich for us in Oakland, but he is similar to Bame, having an excellent season with the Dodgers. 156 WRC plus and a 3.6 WAR, hitting over 300 with 19 homers and 60 ribbies. So he certainly would have been a nice addition as well. But we're hoping that Soto can give us some offense similar to what the Dodgers have been getting from the likes of Lewis and Bame over these last couple months of the season. And with that, we'll call it an episode. We've still got some decisions to make. We've still got about 3 weeks till the trade deadline, and we'll be focusing on whether there's anything else we can do to improve this team between now and then in our next episode. But with the addition of Soto and the recent addition to our rotation of Mr. Madden, feel like we've improved this team a lot over this last week and a half for the near term, and hopefully we've improved this team for the long term as well through what we just did in the draft. If you've got thoughts on what we've done, what we didn't do, what we should have done, always helpful to get that feedback in the comments. And until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.